All right. So as usual, we're doing the quick introductions for people that haven't been on these sessions before, which is Jack and Marie. Floor is yours. Just quick introduction, who you are, why you're interested in this, and what you
My name is Marie Biarreda. I come out of high-tech cellular software leadership stuff. I've spent the past decade more or less on education stuff, continuing the notion of self-organizing teams over hierarchies and emergent processes over strict rules. I'm currently semi-retired and delight to have the opportunity to have my brain continue to work by involving with myself with other people. And this is Eric. New grad, math, computer science.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. Jack?
I'm Jack Park. I was in Corona Y and found it to be very valuable group. And so when Arthur invited me to this, I knew that something good was going to happen. I spent 5 glorious years in the AI labs at SRI International. It's the same lab that Douglas Engelbart created many years ago, where they invented the mouse and windowing computers and a variety of other things. So it's a logical step for me to take the symbolic AI that I was doing. AI itself was not neural nets. They tried to get a start in the early days, but Papert and Minsky shot him down with a paper that said that neural nets couldn't solve the XOR problem, so they weren't worth anything. But of course, that got a resurgence later, and we're back. But for most of the life of artificial intelligence, it was not the connectionism, the neural processes, which are fundamentally polynomials. It was symbolic. You identify objects, you give them an identity called a symbol, and then you trade on those symbols. So my view is that the future of this thing called artificial intelligence lies in hybrid computing, where symbolic and neural processes are engaged together, and you see the evolution of that in this thing called RAG, or using knowledge graphs, which are symbolic objects, to augment the capabilities of the neural nets. And I think it's going to be flipped, and it's going to be the neural nets will augment the capabilities of the symbolic. But then that's me. I'll stop there.
Awesome. Thank you, Jack. And Meenakshi, you just joined in. We're doing quick intros of who you are, what you do, and what you expect from this session. If you want to introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi. My name is Meenakshi, and I completed research in explainable AI recently from Liverpool University. And currently I'm working for American Red Cross. And also I'm working as a Stanford and Google Women in Data Science Ambassador. In these, so far the roles have supported startups in data science, and I'm trying to leverage my skills into the updated systems like RAG and LLMs, and I'm working on a startup. So I think these skills would definitely learning these research papers and would contribute my skills, and both together will make change for the social good. So that's my motto for coming here.
Amazing. This is exciting. Yeah, thanks for joining in. amazing
Thank you.
background, and I'm sure you'll add value to this discussion too.
Yeah.
So I'll kick off the session with obviously the paper that we picked out for this session, which is called LangGPT, Rethinking Structured Reusable Prompt Design Framework for LLMs from the Programming Language, which is an interesting paper because it touches on the challenges that the industry and researchers observed with systematizing the knowledge about all these empirical experiences of how to actually talk with LLMs to produce the desired outputs. And in the past year, we've observed this transition from like the simplest instructions to the growth into the crazy methodologies of chain of thought, tree of thought, the various ways to structure the thinking process, to try and do the task breakdown, decomposition of the problem, the planning, all of these types of complex prompts. And unfortunately, all of these are still being used as kind of like copy paste and rethink it and apply some higher level abstraction like LangChain. And there's little systematization that goes into understanding how do you actually prompt the system to maximize the effectiveness of the language that goes in to produce the desired outputs. And this paper is interesting because it takes the conceptual similarities between the programming language and the natural language of prompting LLMs and tries to systematize that into a framework that is easy to understand to, everyday normal human being and is replicable enough for anyone to take it and go and actually experiment. For me, it was interesting approach because even after prompting for like year and a half probably, sometimes I still revert to very quick kind of like I open ChatGPT and I just ask the question. And I know it's not good enough, but the time trade-off for me is kind of like I'm okay with suboptimal result. But if there would be a framework that I would use, it would be much better experience. So these guys published a paper. They also have a GitHub repo with some of the assets and some of the examples. They have the actual, GPT on the OpenAI platform where you can basically prompt LangGPT to create a template for you. And I can quickly show you guys how that looks like if you haven't experimented with it. But basically you go into this LangGPT and you ask it to create a prompt for a fitness coach to help clients improve their daily habits. And boom, it creates the template based on the framework. And what's interesting is that this framework is really about the structure and the structure of having different almost like subsections, the constraints for the LLM to work within. So it contains profiles, it contains constraints of attention, the context, the goals, the initialization of the workflow, but also the workflow itself, which is, something that we've observed in the past probably 7 to 8 months, where there was a massive need for more structured approach to thinking and planning, where the LLM or so-called agents should have what I call a manifest of action. Basically, a very clear descriptive workflow of what has to be done and when. So that's my thoughts. I would love to hear what you guys think about it. Hopefully, we picked one paper this time, so it will be way easier for people to actually read the paper and digest it. The first session we tried 4 papers, that was too much. The second session we tried 2 papers, that was good. And this time we're experimenting with just 1 paper and a bonus reading. which is an additional thing to discuss. But I'll shut up and give the floor to others.
Well, I'm just going to admit, I read the paper. I knew some of the words. But this is certainly all new territory as far as I'm concerned. And so when I went over to my buddy ChatGPT and asked for some lessons, can you give me what does overall architecture look like? What does it do? What are our hopes and dreams? And that helped. It made the paper a little bit more understandable to me, but it's still definitely way not my field yet.
That makes sense. And I assume you have, I mean, obviously you just described that you use ChatGPT and you use some prompting for it. And
I do. I even eventually, it wouldn't do what I wanted it to. So I said, could you just tell me what words I should use to make you do this? And it did, but it lies.
Of course. Yeah, it's fascinating. And the additional paper that I added to the agenda is the actual, emotional impact of the prompting to,
Right.
to influence the behavior of LLM, which was interesting. I read the paper too, and it was interesting to see that they actually influenced the factor of how much willing LLM is to produce misinformation simply by being polite.
Yes.
So that's fascinating
Right.
for sure.
And then the other thing that I've found it's really useful for, and not just me, but some of my Buddhist friends, we use it for meditation, right? So some people do contemplative meditation, some do more, what do I want to say, intellectual, logic, brain-based kinds of stuff. And so having conversations with ChatGPT on topics of spirituality has turned out to be a real true experience, right? It's like spending the afternoon curling up with your best friend in front of a fireplace and talking philosophy in college, right?
Yeah, and I've used it too for spiritual reasons too. And these are actually the types of use cases where you need a much more structured approach to prompting. Because if you just, ask a question or ask something that you're contemplating to a plain, ChatGPT without context, it will produce, a very bloated, kind of like research-oriented wall of text. But if you try to apply, a framework like LangGPT, and we can actually experiment and do
That
that,
would be cool.
yeah, as a live experiment, you'll see how much more depth it's giving you. So let's see. Create a prompt for spiritual. If I could only spell. Spiritual, I don't know, guide that talks with me on the topics of, I don't know, meaning of life, let's see.
Okay.
And let's see. Okay, so as you can see, even things like the role to offer insights and perspectives on the meaning of life from various spiritual traditions, provide supportive guidance, encouraging self-reflection and personal growth,
I see. Yeah.
facilitate a deeper understanding of seekers' own spiritual beliefs and purpose. So, and even gives the topics of discussion. Interactive elements, meditation or mindful exercises related to the topics discussed, journaling prompts to encourage further reflection on life's meaning and spiritual beliefs, Q&A sessions for addressing specific questions or doubts about spirituality and life's purpose. So it gives it a much more constrained
Yep.
way to have these conversations. So basically, if we take this prompt and copy it into the
Arthur, sorry, I just wanted to say, yeah, I don't know about the Buddhist perspective much, but in the Hinduism philosophy, like, there's this idea of the one of the meaning of life or purpose of life is again different. But if the meaning of life is the purpose of life, which is to attain nirvana and get rid of this cycle by either understanding that you're part of that one being or something like that, that is not really mentioned. I don't know like how sensitive it is to or understanding in that sense of the different philosophies, or this question like is
I
just
wouldn't
like a life
encourage you
coach?
to, take this prompt and give it a go in your ChatGPT just to see how well it does on these things. But yeah, like obviously it's gonna be the same model, the large language model that is used for GPT-4 and ChatGPT, or the mixture of, models inside of it, but it will be much more constrained thanks to this type of framework. And every day, just a normal user doesn't really have enough mental bandwidth, and I would say understanding how to create this type of structure for ChatGPT to start behave and like be constrained to something that is relevant to this type of a topic. And this framework is a great example of creating constraints in a very easy and understandable way.
Very cool.
Yeah, it's a cool framework, that's for sure. Like the fact that it broke it up in that way with a flow.
I'm
Yeah.
actually interested to see how like smaller models that you can run locally could actually produce like templates like this, because there is a lot of knowledge that the model itself should be trained on to just produce all of this kind of, hey, for this type of personality of assistant, you need this, right? This is like a lot of knowledge was already packed into the model itself before it. So it'll be interesting to experiment with this. But it's definitely a great like starting point to, again, use large state-of-the-art model with a lot of knowledge to produce templates like this, and then see, can 7 billion llama kind of follow this now? Because, right, llama was also trained for a lot of waste of data, just not deep enough, I guess. So it'll be interesting to experiment with all of this. And if we go back to, again, like the paper itself, what I found fascinating that in introduction section, they mentioned more than 3 times how hard it is to do like direct prompt optimization. So just if you like cites, direct prompt optimization principles and methods based on historical data require wealth of experience. And then they list a bunch of papers that collect a large number of quality prompts and summaries. So they mentioned CRISPR. Would definitely probably worth to look and see for some inspiration. And some other work, they evaluated 5,493 generations covering 51 themes and 51 styles through 5 experiments. So this is just background research that these folks did. So imagine how like throughout like last year alone, a lot of people spend a lot of times with prompt engineering. And I think the same type of issues we run into like recently was a lot, like I saw a lot of discussion on our Slack where people struggle with like, hey, how do I use this and that? Like, I know Jackpack posted a lot of like research on the topic of how to at least do like structural output and stuff like this. So yeah, definitely like interesting framework. I really like that they simply did, hey, we want to interact with the machine, and we've done like programming languages paradigm for decades, and we've did as a humanity what for thousands of years like natural language, and start like finding parallels just to simply try to bridge the gap at least closer. I think it's only like first steps in this journey, and it'll be like interesting to see what kind of like follow-up research from this will lead to. I really like the like results section because they kind of focusing, hey, our goal is to simplify people's usage of LLMs and stuff, and they have like some nice ratings. So majority of the community finds LangGPT to be like easy to use. So we'll definitely need to try it out in our applications, I think. That's kind of my thoughts on this paper.
Yeah, for sure. By the way, the CRISP framework, I checked it out. I also wasn't familiar with it. And it's way more general, and they described the issues with it, which was very insightful for me too.
I
Meenakshi,
think it's one of the things is like, if you look at the authors of the paper, it's essentially all like, again, Wuhan University, Shenyang. So I think it's a different bubble of AI. And that's why they're focusing on different things that we kind of see here in the United States. So that's why it's like extremely important to find like these papers from other parts of the world where people struggle with different things.
I think it's actually also a side effect, kind of a consequence of the fact that this research is really about the non-native English speakers struggling even more than native English speakers, because if you actually speak English and you have experience with diversity of the, phrasing, it's fairly easy for you to experiment with these things. But when know only certain way to say things, you're very limited to prompting, which is a great, showcase of why this research is coming out from overseas. Meenakshi, you were unmuting. Did you want to say something?
Yeah, I'm currently like working with like behavior like elements in with ChatGPT, like to see how the behavior of individual personality might be the conversation between the kids and parents, or like the conversation between like how to build that positive conversation methodology. So I'm like, I was experimenting with that, and it's really interesting. Like I work with different versions of like GPTs, and I didn't get like that detailed user friendly output which you have given me with Lang. It's like very interesting, and I would like to explore more on it.
Awesome. Yeah, it's pretty useful for sure. I will at least, start experimenting with using it more in my everyday life for sure.
Yeah, this is the start for me, that I'm exploring the LLMs, and firstly I wanted to like to see how like human behavior is very important thing in front of like building the personality with the kids. So I was like, my daughter is 8, and now she's like going through phases. Even she want to be independent, too, and how to make conversations. It's like very hard with them to get bonded sometimes. So like how to calm her tantrums, or how to react in such situations. These are like really important for the younger generation. So I'm like thinking if I could use some AI and like get along this like the way of communicating, it would be great. So that's why I started like exploring LLMs first, and then like it drive me crazy using this prompt engineering and everything. But this is not my workspace, so I'm like entirely into core data science, and like I'm very eager and happy to explore these, because it's very remarkable, like the changes and the things we can do for social good, and also like other use cases are really very interesting.
Yeah, such a great use case for sure. And what I find fascinating is the fact that when people come to ChatGPT or any other, LLMs like interfaces,
Yeah.
and they try something for their everyday use cases, they get fairly frustrated by
Yeah.
trying, maybe a couple of times, not getting the desired output, not understanding this feedback loop of, tuning the prompt to satisfy what they actually want to receive, because they can't really describe it. Like they can't really tell what's wrong with the output, and they can't
That's
really
true.
tweak the language. So
Yeah.
I think it's actually, if you speak about it philosophically, it's actually about the challenge of communication and language itself.
Yeah.
When we try to communicate with someone, we're almost dealing with the same thing. And like when we get
Yeah.
frustrated, most often it's because our prompt is not fit to
Yes.
the perception of the human being on the other side. And to add to that, we're dealing with all kinds of like the structure and biases that person has that we run that prompt through. So in a way,
Completely agree.
it would be actually interesting to see if we can apply this kind of like framework to everyday communication too. And one could
Yeah.
argue that at some point we will. Talking about agents and how at some point each of us will have individual agents that will communicate with other agents of other people or other businesses. And there will be a need for the interface that kind of describes and over communicates all of these details, because even though it will be compute heavy, it will be time cheap in terms of time. And right now, the only reason we don't go to, a store clerk or to hotel lobby and, we can't, dump wall of text describing like, here's how I would like you to communicate with me. I would like you to, be concise and polite and all of these things. We imply that these are baked into responsibilities of the job, the culture mentality. But if you think about the future, we may actually have these encoded in these agentic interfaces. But
So
sci-fi.
when we talk about being able to help with human communication, I've actually been working on a metaphor for mind to be more useful in spiritual kinds of developments. And I look at things as there's the mind, there's the external world, the body is the interface between the two, and then you get augmented reality. And with augmented reality, you literally can see anything, change anything, grant wishes, be the king of your own kingdom, and so on and so on. But what it can do most importantly, I think, is to be the skill of updating other people's theory of mind about you. In other words, being able to really provide that depth of communication is critical. But that's farther down the road. Where I see practical application right this second is that people tend to look at the world through their own frames. Some that are really important right now are honor versus dignity frames, where honor frames tend to be more hierarchical. They develop when you need to protect your family from lawlessness and you got to be the biggest, baddest dude. Whereas dignity frames say every human has intrinsic worth. There's no deserving. That's just not part of the equation. And when you look at news, I would like to be able to look at the facts through either of those frames to see what is a trigger and what does that mean. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think the conversation of the frame is actually a very interesting one because, um, as much, we try to, say that we're not operating on frames and biases, we are,
Of course we are.
all of it goes through that prism and filtering. So optimizing that experience would be interesting for sure.
And making it visible.
Yeah.
Just making it visible. There's so much about that just seeing can do. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
I personally believe because mental health is most of the people are dealing with, and I think it's because of unavailability of everything is everything is going so fast in this space right now. So mental health and behavior and these all not directly but indirectly impact a lot. So it's very important for us to get through, and most of them depend on GPTs for some kind of frustration. Okay, I'm not able to do this, how to react, what to do. So in that cases, I think even for Google, I think long back, just normal search wouldn't be like quite result productive, but this Google, but some catered search with Google like really made an impact, like where they showed there was like entire like course for how to search in Google. I remember attending that in 2009 or somewhat. So
Yeah, right now I think we all live in this world where we assume everyone knows how to use Google, but then we're
yeah,
hit with reality when you say like, "Hey, just Google it," and people can't. Like they
yeah,
just don't have the skill. And it's, I mean, compared to using LLMs, search is a much easier, optimization space to work within versus LLMs where it's just so, so much larger. So that's definitely, I tell everyone that the biggest skill of the next decade will be ability to speak with AI, and people are kind of like laughing it off. But in reality, that's going to be the biggest differentiation. And when people say that, AI will replace jobs, my answer is it's not, the AI that you should fear. It's the other people that will be 10x better by speaking with AI. And that's the kind of that introduces a completely different dynamic in the market and the workplace. So fascinating. Anyways, Sonny, you definitely have something interesting to share. Would love to.
Yeah, first thing I want to say is speaking with AI, the Whisper model is pretty small. It takes 5-6 gigabytes of RAM to run locally, so anybody can run it. So we're already there. And with Google's new tensor, the new I think the Gemini they're adding to the cell phones, the Pixel 8 Pro and above, it's going to revolutionize how we do inference on devices. So that's really cool to watch. But back to my point that I posted in chat just now. So last couple of days I've been working quite closely with prompt engineering and just trying to get the right prompt so I could get the results correctly. I was using an LLM to classify different statements and see what was spam versus what was actually relevant to the discussion that was going on. And the prompt made such a big difference. So it was actually annoying because I didn't want to spend time optimizing prompt that wasn't the core study of my, or the core goal of my study, but it made such a big difference. But what worked out was something analogous to the CRISP framework. So I started with the context kind of, and then gave it a set of labels and explained what each label meant. And in the end, I just asked it to classify something. I was using the guidance framework, which really constrains the LLM on what it can generate. I think it's very similar to the DSPY we were talking about. It had some interesting results, but wasn't giving me what I wanted until I specified this exact output format and used those bold label, like bold letter labels. That's when it started following what I was giving it. So examples are very helpful. That was a big find. The other distinction was whether you provide those instructions in a user message, which we typically do with ChatGPT, versus giving it a system prompt or the instruction prompt. That's something you could do with anything you're running on your own, including if you're calling GPT via the API, you could give it a system prompt. That changes things a lot too. So that's a big distinction to make, I'd say. But yeah, having these frameworks very helpful. So yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, annoying is definitely the word that I frequently want to use.
So a few points to Sonny's example of his experiences. Going from like this zero-shot learning to few-shot learning is, so zero-shot is when you just say, hey, I want this output, please provide it to me, is one thing. But hey, LLM, provide me this type of output, and here are a few examples of what I wanted to see. Hence, few-shot learning is a big difference. It's kind of like two different like branches of research at this point. I think like some people just concentrate on zero-shot and it's one thing, and few-shot learning is like the other thing. That's why definitely if you have examples, definitely include them into parts of your prompt engineering. And I think I saw some of the people in like essentially like startup platform space, they were essentially building platforms to, like if you have a lot of examples, of actions that you wanted your LLM to perform, and now you need to have an engine that supplies those few short examples for each prompt and stuff like this. So there was definitely a lot of activity in this kind of research. Another point that Sony made is that it's important where you also to put instruction system prompt versus like user message part of it. It's very heavily depends on the model you're using and how it was trained. If the format is there is like this dedicated system prompt tag and then instructions and stuff, then it's definitely impactful. But otherwise, it could be like not as important. So definitely look into how the model you're using was trained, like what type of instruction format and so on. It's essentially, I guess my point is this: the format of the instruction of the prompt format that was using the model you're using is a big deal. So it's not easy to actually swap different models in the backend and just use the same like prompt formulation that you were using. Sometimes you need like annoyingly change some tags, like inst closing tag inst versus sys user and stuff like this. So pay attention to that stuff. This has made a world of difference. So just a few notes there.
That definitely did make a difference in my case. So the examples, and I posted a notebook that specifically shows the different techniques I did. So adding examples improved the results significantly. Now the challenge was, how do you come up with good examples? Because you don't always know what the data set's going to look like, and it's meant to be agnostic. So that was a tough one. You don't want to bias the data set towards, or bias the model towards a certain thing anyway. So you want the model to be more independent of certain examples. Examples could be tricky, but yeah, that definitely helps. Transformers library, I think, takes care of the instruction format, exact tokens, the start and end tokens, and so on. And Transformers does, but some other libraries may or may not. But the newer models, it does become a big challenge. So that's definitely something worth watching. But yeah, I did post that notebook. So if there's any questions on that, happy to discuss.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing. Definitely an interesting perspective.
Yeah, thank you. I've got a question. Again, like if it's stupid, please don't mind. But my question is like, so in terms of say biological data analysis, so my work is in the field of biology, bioinformatics. So suppose I want to have a structured prompt that responds to sort of, I'll give you two questions. One is that I want to see how can I prove that, how can I find a pattern in say T cell populations in people with a certain kind of cancer, like what, because certain kinds of cancer, say, let's say triple negative breast cancer, like there are markers which is available, the data is available in different websites. And that will tell you like which is more likely to, people are more likely to survive in a longer term or shorter term. There are clear markers, but this is a complex sort of mix of data, biological data, so T cell populations are there. So answering this would require some kind of understanding of the biology, and not only that, like how such a study is conducted. Like you get the data, suppose the prompt is get the data and then run the analysis, but can it tell me the type of analysis to run? Should you look at these T cell populations? Should you run a linear regressor model, and so on and so forth? So suppose that is one. Secondly, then suppose I say, how do I develop a vaccine for measles? You know, measles as a vaccine, but suppose there's a novel virus that comes, like say COVID-2, and then there's a procedure for that. It does that, but the thing is that it has to be more specific to, you know, with some knowledge of that specific virus or something. Or how do I test the efficacy? So in terms of essentially like biological analysis and biological research, like they have these two broad arms. They go hand in hand. One is statistical data analysis, and the other is like workflow design. And I was wondering, and there are like people do get lost, and people have got different ways of doing it. These studies cannot be compared, and et cetera, et cetera. But so would prompt engineering can be done to sort of solve that and to structure it, and would that also standardize the protocol to, you know, across studies and across workflows?
I think you bring up a very interesting kind of like trajectory where we'll definitely see the autonomous agents working in. So, obviously the biological research is a very, very complex topic, and there is so much causal relationship and reasoning that is involved with understanding like the outcomes and even the approaches to these papers. I would actually, you know, for the purpose of the example, probably I would simplify it to our dear topic of, you know, literature search in the space of LLM. And can we say that the current state of LLMs is able to reason within the like comparison between the papers and analyzing the effectiveness of different approaches? I would say there's enough in there to you know to structure some form of a prompt that compares this type of quantitative data within the papers and produces some basic reasoning and analysis between those two. Let's say there is a paper on the effectiveness of the chain of thought prompts, and then there's a paper on the effectiveness of, you know, tree of thought. And there is the outcome section, the results, and there is a table, and there is basically data. We could run a research agent that would analyze those papers if we give a clear enough prompt that focuses on that comparative nature, and we break up the task into subtasks. I think it's possible to, you know, to arrive at the outcome, the desired outcome, where we can read something that compares the papers, compares effectiveness, and suggests a move forward. Though it's definitely prone to hallucinations, especially with quantitative data, especially with numerical data. This is where we need tools, as they call it, you know, agents using different tools to even digest the tabular data, for example. If you just, you know, send the PDF to ChatGPT or Claude or any of these models, there's a high chance that the tabular data will be misrepresented, just because this is not the type of data that ChatGPT naturally digests. Not to say that it wasn't present there in the original data sets, it's just not something that they were optimizing it to work with, especially in terms of the RLHF, the reinforcement learning with human feedback. Most of the instruction data sets and approaches center around, you know, human kind of like general use cases, question answer, summarization, you know, those types of applications. When it comes to a model that works with a case of like, hey, compare these two papers and, you know, spit out the hypothesis about the effectiveness of different approaches, I would say there's a layer of prompt engineering that has to happen. There's a layer of toolkit that has to exist in terms of working with this different types of data. And then ideally, there should be a model that is specifically fine-tuned for this type of task. And obviously, it's a very hard task to accomplish by itself, but then you have to produce a data set to actually fine-tune the model. So, you know, long answer short, I think it's possible. It's just a very complex problem.
Yeah, thank you.
Does it make sense?
Yeah, no, it makes sense. And one of the very important points you said that it cannot make sense of tabular data. And I think there should be a sort of an interpreting layer. It's there. And if you look at it, like if I can give an example from biology, so you look at DNA. DNA has like doesn't make sense. Like it's just a letter. Or suppose you just write out the letters, you know. But if you take it 3 letters at a time, or if you create the protein out of it, like, you know, that sort of has a structure, and that certainly sort of, you know, a lot of biological systems can understand a protein, like, you know, what a protein does. A protein is a hook and something. So there is like, there are sort of layers of interpretability, right, like the way in our systems work. And in terms of hallucinations, like if I can quickly say is that, you know, like I've mentioned this before, like how different substances like LSD and something like, you know, they, you know, show the hallucination. And there is this paper that I was reading, it's by Dr. Carter Harris, like who does research on all of these things, like, you know, altered mental states and whether they can be therapeutic. And what he says is that the way our human brains work is that we have got a prior. And therefore it's like it creates a certain entropy, and like we've got we base our world based on, we have got these priors, And what these altered substances do, or what these substances do, they relax our priors. So you get more bottom-up thing, and therefore like it's harder to interpret. So there are two things, like our brain keeps on making models of what the world is like, and either like hallucinogens sort of give a window where some of those models are not cut out. You cut out like things that don't look reasonable, and therefore you show the one that is reasonable. I don't know, at some point these models are also doing the same thing, right? There are some weird things that which you're cutting out, and you get a glimpse of that. But there's also the idea that you have got these priors, right? Like which are set by this model, like the weights, but you're relaxing them, and that's what these substances do. So hallucination does give an insight of how the brain works, and that's it can give a better insight than just trying to brute force, trying to understand how it works.
Oh,
So
for
that's
sure. I think this is actually a fascinating area of research, and we've recently, as a community, we've took on a project to fine-tune a large language model to speak Ukrainian, which is, in the space of LLMs, a very underrepresented language. And what we found, we actually wrote a paper, and I hope we'll preprint, publish it sometime soon. But what we found was a phenomenon of code switching, which was based on actually what humans do in bilingual cultures, where they kind of speak both languages at the same time, where the words are not necessarily one language or another, but a mix of both. And we found that phenomenon in the LLM, where this was not existent in the actual data sets.
That's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, and we've documented that, and very interesting, and also funny in a way, because it like you'll read the reference why it's funny in the paper, but this is the exact kind of like a case of a hallucination that by itself mimics how human brains work in the natural language environment. So yeah.
That's
Yeah,
crazy.
that's interesting. Because if I can quickly say, so they did the MRI on kids who are bilingual, and then they found that kids who are bilingual, they're taught after a point versus before you're 4 years old. Like your parents are bilingual, and then you start, very early. But if you sort of go to Spanish school or something at a later age, so what happens is that when you say an app, so there's a right side of the brain and the left side of the brain, and it seems the left side of the brain has the words and the right side has the representation. So people who have split brain actually will sort of know what they're looking at, but they won't have a word for it. And this has been sort of shown. So, so now comes the interesting thing, is that the representation of what an apple is versus the word, which is on the left side. But for bilingual kids, like before a certain age, the word could be Spanish or French or German or whatever. There could be different words, but there's one representation, as opposed to a model that's sort of, sorry, I'm using the word model, but a kid who is like exposed early, like as a suppose a model that's
The human model.
Just a second. So yeah. So the thing is that they have only one representation. So kids who are bilingual early have one representation, but kids who are bilingual late have two representations. And that comes to the point of that switchover when you're creating that hybrid. I don't know if the hybrid has to do with the mix of those representations versus the words themselves.
Yeah.
I find I was born in Sweden, so I became a bilingual speaker at a young age. At an old age, this is another interesting contrast. I was better at finding the word in the correct language when I was young than I am now. I am now finding that I am having to default to Swedish words sometimes, which I can see the image, I can see the person, I can see it, but I can't come up with any of the words I would normally use. And so I grab one from another language.
Is that simply because you've been using one language so much that your neural pathways are now biased towards it?
Certainly, yes. My language is far more biased toward English, but I'm finding that when I can't come up with something in English, the Swedish word is more likely to be there.
Oh, so you're reverting back to the other language.
Exactly. Okay. And even though I've been in the United States since 1968, speaking primarily English.
That's very interesting. So I speak multiple languages, Hindi being the language I grew up learning. But the funny thing is that in India, nobody speaks pure Hindi. There's always a bunch of English mixed in. So while I can speak English without speaking any other language, when I speak Hindi, there's always some other language mixed in. If you restrict me, and there were times when I had to take a test in Hindi, I couldn't speak any other language, and I couldn't speak Hindi fluently anymore, even though I functionally speak it natively, but I can speak it without mixing other languages. So that was interesting as well. It's just what you're used to and what you grew up doing, but interesting how that changes when you're looking at back to other languages for words that you can pick.
That's interesting. I have similar experience with India. So I have to go actually, but I wanted to say an interesting news that came out just last week. So people in Antarctica, the research station, they were isolated for 6 months because, that's, you cannot go there in winter and they're just kept there. So what happened was they found that in those 6 months, a new dialect had evolved. They were talking to each other and they didn't realize it. But when people came from outside, they were talking a language which nobody had heard. Like literally, it was a mix of some Antarcticese, so to speak, or whatever. But that thing has shifted. So that's sort of interesting how, the evolution of these models, like how this evolves. So one of the things with, AI is that it evolves, it's constantly changing. And that's how
Yeah,
it is.
especially with so much AI generated content being spit out nowadays. I mean, essentially AI is already training on AI
Itself.
produced
Yeah.
content, which is scary in its own, but
Yeah.
also a philosophical question.
Mhm.
All right,
So sorry, I have to drop off, but I'll
yeah,
catch up
thank you,
later.
Sid. Yeah,
Thank
there you always bring up these interesting facts and stories that make the discussions more alive.
Okay.
So thank
Yeah,
you.
thank you.
I'll be wrapping this up. I think this was a very productive and interesting discussion. Hope everyone enjoyed it. The paper is definitely useful, at least for me. And we haven't really had time to dive into the research agent part of the work. But to give you guys an update, so Sid is working on the daily ingestion and summarizing the papers that we're loading into the system every day. And Wendy has made some progress with improving the system to explain why certain candidates that the agent recommends or the recommender recommends are useful to us as a community. So thanks to the mixed trial endpoint, the LLM is able to pick the candidate and provide the human explanation why this paper is interesting, which obviously captured my attention, and I picked the paper, and it ended up being a very useful paper. So a proof that
Do you have anything to can you share the agent and those details like in GitHub so that I can explore something?
Yep, it's on our GitHub, PolyAgent. You can check it out. And yeah, you're not a part of the community yet, but I would love to have an onboarding call with you. You definitely have an amazing background. So yeah, let's schedule the onboarding call. Go to polyagent.co,
Okay.
join community, fill out the application, and we'll get in touch. And you'll be able to get all of these useful pieces as they come out from the community.
Yeah, most interested to join. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. All right, any closing thoughts? Anyone? Jack, you had something you wanted to say?
It was back in this dual language conversation, and I'd had an experience. I took 2 years of French in high school. I'm in California. I should have taken Spanish, but I took French. And many years later, I decided to take German. So I went over to UCLA and took a semester of German. And on the very first classroom test, I found myself answering in French. And I have no idea how or why the French crept in, because it never really was a solid part of me. I only had experience of dreaming in French a few times in high school, but never really mastered the language. But it crept back during in a test in a German class, and I've never understood why. That was my comment.
Interesting. All right. Anyone else? Any closing thoughts, ideas?
So I do have a thought about the way we're having this discussion. It's helpful to have a text medium on the side, so just posting messages in chat so you can have parallel thoughts and ideas. But Zoom's chat is non-persistent, so would it make sense to maybe have an active Slack channel on the side while we're talking?
Yeah, I think so. I've started with these Google Docs, but I didn't want to send a Google Doc to kind of divert attention. So I think the Slack is actually a perfect place for it. So yeah, let's try it for the next session for sure.
I want to say like I wanted to add one thing. When I worked with cancer data and like I worked with diabetic data, like using PyCaret and AutoML really helped to tune the model a lot and get like the data was so biased, but I had to like do one-hot encoding and like it using all those techniques, I improved. And I also like research with my explainable AI concepts of Lyman Shap, how it improved and everything. And it improved almost by 35%. So I think, yeah, using some techniques like that would really like leverage the model improvement.
Yeah, that's impressive improvement for sure.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Thanks everyone for joining in. Looking forward to our next session. And yeah, thank you for bringing interesting ideas and discussions.
Thank you.
So much.
All right, have a good rest of your weekend. Bye-bye.
Thank you.